Thank you. The darkness of ignorance, so often surrounding the subject of sex, must not be allowed to follow us into space. Hello, everyone. My name is Simon Dubé, and I'm a PhD candidate in psychology at Concordia University in Montreal. I specialize in human sexuality and erotics. And today, I will argue that, given the importance of eroticism in human life, we must immediately start to explore space sexology, or the comprehensive scientific study of extraterrestrial intimacy and sexuality. So, to survive and thrive, but also to understand our universe and continue to expand into the cosmos, humanity must learn to live beyond our home planet Earth. As such, we are entering a new age of space exploration, the age of space colonization. National agencies and private companies are leading several missions to the International Space Station, the Moon, and of course, Mars, with the ultimate objectives of conducting research, occupying strategic military and politico-economic positions, exploiting resources, bolstering space tourism, and eventually settling our solar system. The pool influence of modern national and private space organization is gradually democratizing space by lowering the costs of future travel, exploration, and tourism. In turn, this is making space more accessible to a wider clientele, which raises several questions about how to make space life compatible with human needs, including our intimate and sexual needs. After all, space remains hazardous, and long-term space missions and settlements pose significant technical challenges, like building rockets, vehicles, and viable habitats, which intersect human challenges, such as enabling health, psychosocial adaptation, and performance during space flights. Among these human challenges are several constraints imposed by space on our intimate relationships and sexuality. These may range from gravitational effects, radiation exposure, isolation and stress, to leaving significant others behind, accessing intimate partners, as well as contending with harassment, interpersonal conflicts, and issues of privacy or hygiene aboard space habitats. Addressing the sexological realities of space is crucial, since if left unaddressed, they may lead to the imposition of detrimental policies of involuntary abstinence, which could in turn incite stress, anxiety, and depression, heighten risks of violence, as well as generate tensions between crew members in an already dangerous environment where cooperation is primordial. Addressing such realities is also important since they may potentially impact mission success, as well as deter future candidates from contributing to our long-term space endeavors. Despite that, in 2028, NASA publicly declared, "We don't study sexuality in space, and we don't have any studies ongoing with that. If that's your specific topic, there's nothing to discuss." And unfortunately, this kind of position regarding human sexuality does not seem to have changed much, or at least enough, since 2028. To date, the challenges associated with human life in space are largely studied by fields such as bioastronautics, space medicine, and astronautical hygiene. But none of them has directly nor comprehensively addressed the wide spectrum of human eroticism in space, ranging from relational and socioaffective processes to intimate relationships and sexual activities. This situation is untenable, unethical, and counterproductive to our long-term space endeavors. It needs to change now. National and private space organizations need to acknowledge the importance of eroticism in human existence and begin to develop a permanent research program dedicated to space sexology, along with its relevant scientific agenda, programs, and institutions. Of course, the idea of studying sexuality-related topics in space is not something new, even though space programs don't seem to like advertising it. Over the years, several experiments have investigated the reproduction and development of vertebrates under space conditions. Several scholars have also called for more research on the broader issues related to human eroticism in space. For example, in '89, Dr. Levin was one of the first to review the potential effects of space flights on our sexual and reproductive systems. He also highlighted the lack of research on even the most basic aspects of human sexuality in extraterrestrial contexts, such as its potential effect on our sexual function and gametes. But it's really in '98 that Dr. Raymond Noonan published, in a doctoral dissertation, the first comprehensive analytical work on long-term human sexuality and intimacy in space. This doctoral work explored the wide range of possible challenges associated with space eroticism, along with their potential influence on mission success. This work also proposed that sex and gender should be approached using a system perspective, whereby human and their sexuality would be considered parts of the space habitats and fully integrated to their closed artificial ecosystems. Dr. Noonan subsequently went on to propose that space agencies should devise programs dedicated to sex research and education in collaboration with the scientific community of sexology. 4 years later, Shimizu and colleague echoed these claims and called for the systematic study of human sexuality in extraterrestrial context. They further argue that this is essential if our ultimate objective is to build happy and peaceful space societies. In 2006, Lara Munmesi then published Sex in Space, a book in which they not only called for more research on space intimacy, but also emphasized potential technical solutions, such as Vanabanta's two-suit, a garment that could maintain partners together to enable sexual activities under complete weightlessness. Sometime later, Ronca and colleagues further reviewed the limited human and non-human research, animal research related to the differential impacts that space could have across sex and gender when it comes to their reproductive health. And in 2016, Dr. Alex Leyendecker advocated for the development of a permanent astrosexological research institute, a proposition that we obviously support, but that has, to the best of our knowledge, yet to see the light of day in 2021. Overall, the work of these scholars highlights that, with sufficient time, intimacy and sexuality will and must occur in space if humanity aims for long-term travel and settlements. However, the limited research related to space sexology has, to date, almost exclusively focused on reproduction. That is, research has typically focused on the factors that may impact our sexual functions, fertility, conception, pregnancy, and development. Notably, for ethical and economic reasons, this research often relies on non-human animals and ground-based models. This line of work has identified several risk factors that can impact the reproductive functions of mammals. These include radiation exposure, which can alter the DNA of cells and gametes, and in turn, can be detrimental to ova and spermatozoa, as well as promote cancer formation, congenital malformations, and/or developmental anomalies in the embryo, fetus, or child. These also include the extreme gravitational changes of liftoff, reentry, and life aboard artificial habitats, which can lead to reduced bone density, muscle atrophy, vision and neurovestibular impairments, as well as negatively impact our hormonal and cardiovascular systems. With regard to both radiation and gravity, non-human studies have found that, for instance, fertilization may be possible under microgravity, but normal embryo development may require a standard 1G. Both increased and reduced gravity may negatively impact the motility and number of spermatozoa, yet encouragingly, mouse freeze-dried spermatozoa could be shielded from radiation and safely stored aboard the International Space Stations for extended periods of time, as well as produce viable offspring. When it comes to human experiments, a study of 13 female astronauts who gave birth post-space flights did not denote any increase in the number or diversity of complications compared to the general population. Bedrest studies also found that microgravity may affect spermatogenesis, and spaceflight may reduce testosterone levels in male subjects. Remarkably, however, little is known about the overall intimacy and sexuality of astronauts, including their reproductive health. So even in one of the most studied area connected to space sexology, research has barely scratched the surface. And more to the point, sexology extends far beyond reproduction. It encompasses interconnected phenomena, including but not limited to sexual health, anatomy, responses, and lifespan development, but also consent, pleasure, sociocultural norms, genders and sexes, as well as everything that has to do with justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Arguably, not taking into account this complexity may lead to the realization of several risks beyond the hazard already described. These include, for example, the challenges of living in extremely isolated, confined, remote, and self-sustained artificial habitats, which can be stressful, make it difficult to meet human sociosexual needs, as well as require that people living in space handle dangers or emergencies in a relatively independent manner. Granted a high degree of stress characterizing such circumstances, space inhabitants may be at greater risks of interpersonal conflicts, along with psychopathological issues such as anxiety and depression. They may also need to contend with being away from significant others for long periods of time, if not indefinitely. Space habitats can further limit access to compatible intimate partners, restrict privacy, and, not unlike the way astronauts must relearn how to eat, groom, clean, and excrete using the adapted system available, impose strict hygiene and self-care trainings and protocols to ensure that these environments are kept viable and pleasant. In parallel, we can also reasonably expect that by regularly interacting with one another, some of the people living in close proximity for extensive periods of time will be attracted to each other, potentially fall in love, and develop casual or committed intimate relationships. Thus, space organizations should develop the necessary policies and protocols to contend with these situations and how they may influence the safety and affective states of astronauts, as well as mission success. Relatedly, the remoteness of space environments will impose that space inhabitants learn to comprehensively address sexual and reproductive health, ranging from, for example, contending with infections, injuries, or dysfunctions, to all matters associated with conception, pregnancy, abortion, miscarriage, birth, and child rearing. It also means that space societies will have to carefully plan and monitor population levels and their compositions in order to keep them sustainable and avoid exceeding available resources. These same populations will also need to navigate the complexity of sociocultural differences, and with that, a diversity of norms and behaviors that may lead to the emergence of unique erotic space cultures. Furthermore, we can expect that humanity will bring into space the full range of its sexual preferences, orientations, identities, and relationship structures. A diversity that should be fully integrated to space programs and exploration to better contend with the risks associated with the lived experience of, for example, gender and sexual minorities, as well as other intersecting and/or marginalized groups. We can also anticipate that commercial aspects of sexuality may emerge in long-term space journeys, such as the use of erotic stimuli or technology, but also the emergence of forms of consensual sex work, and more problematically, forms of sexual exploitation or trafficking that, by definition, infringe upon human rights. Finally, based on what we know of our experience on Earth, including in the military and scientific missions, we have to assume and prepare for the enactment of some forms of sexual violence, harassment, aggression, or rape in analog and space contexts, where living and human resources may be scarce and in turn may be used to coerce people into unwanted behaviors. Importantly, we remark that many of these risks may disproportionately affect certain demographics, such as Black, Indigenous, and people of color, along with women, females, and gender or sexual minorities, such as LGBTQ+ individuals and communities. Conversely, if we prepare and safely facilitate the wide spectrum of human eroticism in space, we could reap its significant benefits for the health and well-being of future space inhabitants. For example, enabling solitary or partnered sex can help sleep and reduce stress. It can also help alleviate pain or tension, facilitate sexual functioning and satisfaction, relieve headaches, increase testosterone levels, improve self-esteem and body image, strengthen pelvic floor muscles, potentially protect against prostate cancer, enable pair bonding as well as building or maintaining intimate relationships, help express affections, closeness, and nurturance, make our lives more fun, pleasurable, and worth living, and ultimately help normalize space life by enabling positive aspects of human existence outside of Earth's atmosphere. Yet, in order to make all of this possible, we propose that both the technical and human factors associated with space sexology could be approached through a biopsychosocial model. This model posits that complex, ever-changing human phenomena, such as the future of our intimacy and sexuality in new space environments, rests upon the close interaction between biological, psychological, and sociocultural factors. This model allows us to holistically anticipate the scientific dimension and axes of our eroticism in space. And it reminds us that sexuality is not just about reproduction, and reproduction is not just about producing viable offspring. This model also reminds us that such a comprehensive space sexology program will require the input of various experts, professionals, stakeholders, and citizens, including but not limited to sexologists, relationship experts, OBGYN, reproductive endocrinologists, along with nurses, psychologists, sociologists, erotic technology designers, and people representing our demographic diversity. Still, the development of space sexology also comes with challenges. For one, space sexology faces the fact that the decisions made by space organizations often intersect with the conservative sexual norms and values of their funders, who may not want to have anything to do with sex. On the other hand, it also requires the design of safe and hygienic artificial ecosystems that facilitate and are compatible with human sexuality, which may be both costly and contingent upon solving the politico-economic challenge in the first place. Lastly, the success of space sexology ultimately rests upon the participation and cooperation of space organizations, along with their administrators, researchers, astronauts, and anyone living in space, when it comes to taking part in the necessary research, courses, and training, as well as abiding by its recommendations, policies, and protocols. That said, to help overcome some of these challenges, we propose that space organizations should be reminded that sexual rights are human rights. Intimacy can enhance human health and well-being. And based on our previous experiences and call for research, space organizations won't be able to feign ignorance when problems inevitably arise. In fact, they may be increasingly held accountable for the safety and well-being of those that they take into space. Meaning that space organizations who kneel to their conservative taxpayers or investors may instead have to contend with the very public and media-fueled consequences of their inaction or lack of foresight when it comes to dealing with the sexological realities of human spacelife. So instead, we suggest to align space program and exploration with a more progressive agenda, one that actively promotes sexual rights, agency, and freedom for all. We also propose to develop systems that enable astronauts to safely engage in solitary and partnered erotic activities with people within and outside of their crews. But that in itself will also require us to design a space sexology program that favors openness and sex positivity. It may also require us to test the effectiveness of such programs and their technologies, perhaps in the context of analog missions. So in the end, if I could leave you with some key takeaways, it's this. Sexuality is central to human life. fully recognizing this simple fact is crucial to the well-being of our future spacefaring civilization. And in 2021, we cannot delay this any longer, because producing quality science takes time and resources. And because sex in space is not about going somewhere else to have sex. It's ultimately about expanding beyond our immediate neighborhood into a universe to which we belong. On that note, I'd like to thank my labs, collaborators, the Mars Society Convention for organizing this event, and of course, all of you for listening. Thank you.